I'm Kim Bremmer, your host today for another edition of BoviNews, keeping you up to date on the cattle industry's latest technologies, management, genetics, and more. Today we're talking about improving feed efficiency, a goal for every dairy producer. Unfortunately, it's difficult to achieve through normal management practices and even harder to really measure. Up until now, there's been no way to directly affect feed efficiency through genetics, but a new genomic selection trait called FeedSave could change just that and provide dairy producers with a way to improve feed efficiency through genomic selection. This webinar will offer insight into how the test was developed, a new commercial tool that can impact feed efficiency, and how producers can benefit from this new technology. We have a great panel today of presenters for you. Joel Pankowski, Dr. Kent Weigel, Juan Moreno, and Tim Clark. First up presenting today is Joel Pankowski from Arm & Hammer Animal and Food Production. Dr. Joel Pankowski joined Arm & Hammer as a manager of field technical services in 2011 and is responsible for providing technical support to the field sales team, nutritionists and dairy producers in the Eastern US and Canada. Joel received both his BS and MS degrees from the Ohio State University and then went on to earn his PhD in dairy management from Cornell University. His areas of expertise are reproductive management and health, quantitative dairy herd data analysis, and transition cow management and nutrition. His over 20-year career has included a variety of technical and leadership roles with Monsanto Dairy Business, CPG Nutrients, Agway, Land O'Lakes Purina Feed, and Alfarma Animal Health. So with that, Joel, take it away.
Thanks, Kim. I really appreciate the opportunity today to talk specifically about measuring feed efficiency for more profit. I think before we begin the conversation about how to measure feed efficiency, it's important to understand how to calculate feed efficiency. It's actually a pretty simple math calculation that you can actually do on the back of a napkin. It basically looks at specifically looking at milk production, dividing that by the dry matter intake of the animal, and then you come up with an efficiency factor. So for instance, we would tend to go to most dairies and want to look at energy corrected milk as our milk production parameter. That allows us to standardize feed efficiency across dairies. That's important for nutritionists and veterinarians relative to their client base. So you can take a Jersey herd, for instance, and compare it to a Holstein herd and compare either one of those two to a crossbred herd if we use energy corrected milk as opposed to raw volume. As far as intake, we're going to specifically look at the feed bunk managers, giving us a number where it would be simply the dry matter intake per pen, in this case, most likely is going to be the feed delivered minus the weighbacks. And we'll talk more about how to do that in detail in just a second. That gives us then a calculation of energy corrected milk divided by dry matter intake and our feed efficiency thing. Our feed efficiency calculation. So this takes into account the production and the dry matter intake of the animal. It realizes that efficiency changes by stage of lactation. So in other words, as cows are grouped either by days in milk or by reproductive status, which at some point defaults to days in milk, their dietary energy requirements change, and that feed efficiency number will change with it. And there's also different adjustment factors we can use if we want to get more intricate with the calculation. For instance, most of the ration software that these nutritionists would use on farm, the majority of the dynamic models would calculate adjustment factors to help better refine the calculation relative to the animal's environment. For instance, relative humidity, temperature on a given day, and such. So our goal is to strive for improved efficiency. We like to use this efficiency number as a guide. It's not an absolute, so it's a conversation of accuracy versus precision. On any given dairy, it's probably more important for the management team to be precise as opposed to strive for the actual true number. We want to get numbers that represent over time specific monitoring values for that dairy. We should probably look to do this on a monthly basis at least. Measuring it consistently is very important. So we want to measure this feed efficiency number the same way every time. We'd like to use the same milk production value every time. In other words, that energy corrected milk number would be the preferred number. Ideally, to get a more precise and accurate vision of what's going on in the dairy relative to feed efficiency, we'd like to feed the cows and collect the feed refusals at the same time each day to take out variation relative to time of day. And then in an ideal world, and not always possible, but in an ideal world, we'd like to have the same person determine specifically the refusals. What we find on most of these dairies is that the software in the feeding tools, in other words, the delivery systems that deliver the feed, the TMR wagons or trucks, those are pretty accurate and really aren't impacted by human error at all. It's the refusal part of this calculation where there's opportunity for variation due to different people calculating the actual refusal amount. So as we calculate this number on a dairy and we strive for improved efficiency, what are some things we need to consider? Well, first of all, forage quality. We need to monitor forage quality, realizing that higher quality forages often move through the cow at a faster rate, whereas lower quality forages tend to move through a cow at a slower rate. And this will affect our efficiency factor. In fact, depending on the group of cows and the type of forages you feed, that diet composition can actually influence that efficiency factor, and it can vary year to year based on your forage base. We also want to focus on feed ingredients that have a higher feed efficiency value. So think of it in this way. We want to have, there's two primary buckets of feed efficiency type products or components in a ration. Those ingredients that would increase rumen microbial growth. They allow for additional breakdown of each pound of feed. So if we have components in the diet that would increase microbial growth, we would most likely get better use of our feeds and have a better feed efficiency opportunity. That second bucket of opportunity falls in the line of rumen bypass type supplements. So ingredients that will go right through the rumen to the hind gut. And they're things typically that the cow can't deliver through fermentation. Those have a direct impact on feed efficiency, whereby the rumen doesn't negatively impact the flow of ingredients and helps us with that calculation. So as we calculate feed efficiency, again, we want to use guidelines for a group of cows based on their stage of lactation. I mentioned earlier the difference between accuracy and precision. We want to be precise or repeatable in our calculations, eliminating variation as opposed to striving for these benchmarks to be absolute. But this is just a guideline that's pretty well established in the literature for dairy cattle, regardless of breed. Splitting the group into two sets. The fresh and high cows in the first grouping, we look at a feed efficiency factor of 1.6 or greater. That number is driven a lot by the fact that, for instance, fresh cows, they'll be mobilizing body reserves and eating less dry matter. So that number, again, is not an absolute, but it's more of a target. And our goal is to benchmark where we start with this program and be able to see changes over time to where we can approach this type of a goal. The second grouping that we look at is late lactation cows. The feed efficiency number for them would be as low as 1.3. Those animals, they're not producing as much milk, and they tend to be regaining body weight. So their number is going to be lower than a fresh or a high cow. And again, these are just general guidelines as we move through to try to give you an idea of what the targets should be. So in summary, feed efficiency is a very good tool to help us improve our productivity and profitability. And I guess I'd give you 4 things to take a look at relative to watch outs if you choose to go down this road and measure this data. first of all, be as consistent as possible to eliminate variation. We talked about having the same person, for instance, measure the refusals. I discussed earlier the opportunity to feed the cows at the same time of day, or also collect the refusals at the same time of day. Secondly, feed efficiency values are going to vary depending on stage of lactation. Those high producing early lactation animals are going to be more efficient than the late lactation animals will be. Thirdly, feeding high quality forages can directly influence feed efficiency. Again, focusing on feed ingredients of higher feed efficiency value. Those ingredients we discussed that would increase microbial growth to help you get more out of your forage base, and or feed ingredients designed to bypass the rumen and get to the hind gut directly. At the end of the day, this whole conversation about feed efficiency in the dairy industry is really designed around improving the efficiency of the animal, and it's all about producing more milk at less cost.
Thank you so much, Joel. We appreciate your insight today. The second presentation that we have for you on this panel is going to come to us from Dr. Kent Weigel. Dr. Weigel is from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's a professor and chair of the Department of Animal and Dairy Sciences there. He holds a research, extension, and teaching appointment and serves as a technical consultant for numerous companies and organizations in the dairy genetics industry. His research focuses on genetic selection and genome-guided management programs to improve the productivity, health, fertility, and feed efficiency of dairy cattle using tools such as whole genome selection, advanced reproductive technologies, crossbreeding, electronic data capture systems, and artificial intelligence algorithms. Dr. Weigel has published approximately 200 peer-reviewed journal articles on various aspects of genetic improvement and management of dairy cattle, and has given lectures to academic, industry, and producer audiences in more than 30 countries. So with that, Dr. Weigel.
Thanks, Kim. What I'd like to do here in the next few minutes is talk a little bit about the development of genomic predictions for feed saved. And this is a topic we've been working on for close to 10 years. And by we, I mean collaborators at several universities, primarily Michigan State, Iowa State, Florida, and Wisconsin, but also USDA, Ag Research Service, Virginia Tech folks were involved some, and also Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding. So I think you all understand feed is the largest expense on most dairy farms. So even small improvements can have an impact, not only on finances of the farm and reducing feed costs, but also on improving the environment and alleviating some of the land pressure or helping land utilization. So what we're trying to do here is improve biological efficiency of the dairy cow. And one of the real challenges there is that requires individual daily intakes for very large numbers of cows. There's a lot of good research done 2 or 3 decades ago on feed efficiency, but we really couldn't do anything before genomics because we didn't have the ability to go out in a progeny testing program and measure 100,000 cows every year as all the daughters of the new progeny test bulls for individual intake for a long period of time. And so it's difficult and expensive, but with genomics, it's at least feasible. So we've had a couple of grants, a federal grant from USDA, National Institute for Food and Agriculture, and subsequently a Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding and Foundation for Food and Ag Research grant. And in these 2 grants, both were led by Mike Vandehar, my colleague at Michigan State, and several universities participated. Again, the main ones being us in Florida and Iowa State, along with the USDA. And the goal in the first one was to measure 5,000 cows, the second one another 3,600 cows, to establish a reference population. And by that I mean these are older cows where we have or lactating cows where we have genomic information, and we also have individual intakes for at least 6 weeks in mid-lactation. And from that we can develop breeding values for feed efficiency and apply those to other animals in the population, especially young calves that have been just through genomic testing program. What we're trying to do here is maximize the amount of energy, consumed energy, that's captured as milk or body tissue, and try to limit the amount that's lost as feces, gas, urine, heat for metabolizing feed or for maintenance, so that we can get cows that go use that gross energy that they consume to maximize the amount of milk produced and body tissue that's gained. And it's a little bit more complicated in dairy cattle than some other species, where you just have to look at rate of gain versus feed intake. Here we have to also account for the cow has to stay healthy, she has to reproduce, she's gaining and losing body weight and body condition over that lactation cycle. It's a little different from a feedlot situation, but nonetheless, at the end of the day, we want cows with high milk yield and low maintenance cost, and then again capturing a high proportion of that consumed energy for milk production. And so cows at 5 or 6 multiples of maintenance in terms of the amount of energy going to milk production versus the amount going to maintain their body functions are efficient, and we want to select among those for those that can use that feed most efficiently. Our project, we focused on mid-lactation because that's the stage when the cows aren't gaining and losing a lot of body weight. So at the beginning of lactation, a lot of body condition is being used or being lost, essentially, because cows are in negative energy balance. At the end of lactation, it's a little easier, but still you have the maintenance or the growth requirements, excuse me, of the fetus. And so what we want to focus on is cows between 50 and 200 days in milk, and try and get them for at least 6 weeks, plus an adaptation period before that to learn to use the gates. And during that period, we try to measure dry matter intake, body weights, body condition scores, and then of course milk yield, milk composition, and do some feed analysis. There's a lot of error checking and missing values and that sort of thing we have to be really careful about. There are times when there's a problem with the electronic gates or cows stealing feed, and so there's a lot of effort and time that goes into data checking, but also monitoring the animals to make sure that the animals and equipment are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so at the end of the day, then we try to measure, or we do measure, residual feed intake, or RFI. And we do that within a research station because, for example, we have cows in Wisconsin under cold stress at times of the year, cows in Florida under extreme heat stress. So we do it on a contemporary group basis, where that contemporary group is defined by the research farm, the experiment that they're on, and then the diet. So it's much like the herd year season contemporary groups that we use for genetic evaluations of any other trait, to try and focus on how certain families perform relative to other families within a standardized environment at a given time. And then these data are passed on to Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding to use in a genomic evaluation system. And these will be introduced here in just a few days. So if we think about RFI, or residual feed intake, what we're doing is we're comparing observed intake for an animal with her predicted intake. And that predicted intake is based on her secreted milk energy, her metabolic body weight, and then her body weight change. Is she gaining or losing weight? And it's all done again on a within cohort basis. So cows standing there next to each other, eating the same diet at the same time. And cows that eat less than expected have a favorable or negative RFI. And that's desirable, again, acknowledging that we have to make sure that they're also staying healthy, fertile, and those sorts of things, because we don't want it to sort of confuse efficiency with poor body condition, right? So when one looks at publishing these results, there are some different options. Residual feed intake could be a standalone trait. It's attractive in some sense that it's independent of milk yield and body size, because that's part of the calculation. It's how much feed are they eating more or less than their contemporaries after we account for those things like body size and milk yield. But it can be confusing to interpret, and the reliabilities are quite low. Other countries in Europe, for example, publish, in some cases, dry matter intake as a standalone trait. It's fairly simple to interpret. How much did that cow eat on a given day on a dry matter basis? Reliabilities are higher, but the negative of there is it's very strongly positively correlated with milk yield, and we already measure milk yield. And so the approach that we like and that CDCB is going with is feed saved. It was developed by Jenny Price and her colleagues in Australia a few years ago. It's fairly simple interpretation, and what it does is combines two things. So residual feed intake with excess maintenance costs. So does the cow eat more or less than she's expected to based on her size and her performance? And then is she bigger than she needs to be to do this job, right? And it's those two things together make feed saved. It can also be extended with some assumptions to include the lactating and rearing periods and salvage value and those sorts of things can be incorporated into that index. So it does have a little bit higher reliabilities than RFI. It needs a little educational effort to explain, though, as we're doing here today. So feed saved, again, will be RFI plus a body size penalty. It will go into net merit. And body size has been in net merit for 20 years now, based on type traits and predicting body weight composite. And again, we include the rearing, lactating, dry periods, salvage value, calf value, and even the added housing costs of needing bigger stalls. And this will all become part of feed saved here next week. One of the things we learned in this project is that maintenance costs are about double or even a little more than double of what net merit had been charging previously for large cows. And the reliability of the body weight composite, or that piece of feed saved, is actually quite good, more than 75%. On the other hand, the reliability of RFI is quite low, less than 20% for young calves. It's higher for cows that have been measured themselves, of course. That's based on a genomic reference population of a little over 6,000 cows to date. And we're going to keep growing that, as I'll talk about in a minute. And so feed saved is the combination of those two. The reliability on average will be about 37% for young calves. And that's much less than we're used to, right? So we'll make some mistakes, but the economic value is pretty high, and there's genetic variation. The standard deviation, according to some calculations by Paul Van Reyden at the USDA, is about 109 pounds per lactation. This trait will favor medium-sized cows that can produce milk very efficiently, and it will get more than 20% of the weight, most likely, in the new net merit index in the next spring. So going forward, the plan is to publish feed saved PTAs now, and then to put them in lifetime net merit in the next sire summary in the spring. We'll continue to measure cows and add about 750 new cows per year to the reference population. We'll also, at the same time, do research on developing other ways to measure dry matter intake on a larger scale on commercial farms, for example, with wearable sensors, 3D cameras, machine learning algorithms, that sort of thing, CDCB, and also as researchers, we're working with some international partners to bring in some additional data from Canada and other countries that will be helpful. And really, going forward, we also want to understand a couple things. What do these differences in feed efficiency actually mean in terms of the physiology of the animal, immunology, rumen microbiology? Are there additional energy sinks that we should be looking at, and how do we measure those? And then how is it affected by diet? Are there genotype by environment interactions, or by genotype by diet interactions? And almost certainly there are, but how do we quantify those? So I will stop there and thank you for your attention and for joining this webinar today.
Thank you, Kent. Next on our list for presenters today is Juan Moreno. Juan is the CEO of Sexing Technologies and has been a pioneer in developing proprietary technology in semen sorting science and animal reproductive services. He received his Bachelor of Science degree in dairy science from The Ohio State University with advanced training in bovine reproduction, specializing in sorting and embryo transfer. STgenetics launched their EcoFeed Index in December of 2017. EcoFeed is built around efficiency, which is a moderately inheritable trait. The EcoFeed Index is an integrated approach to genetic selection developed by STgenetics to help producers create the next generation breeding females. The program encompasses environmental, metabolic, and genomic factors affecting dairy cattle profitability from birth until the cow leaves the farm. STgenetics is a worldwide leader in livestock reproductive services, including sex-sorted semen, embryo production, and genomic testing. So with that, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. So we started looking, our history with feed conversion and feed efficiency goes back about 14, 15 years, in which a friend of mine got interested in measuring feed conversion in beef cattle. And we had the opportunity to work with him for a number of years, and we saw a tremendous improvement in his genetic selection program on the beef side as a result of selecting for basically feed efficiency. So once we learned of the work that Ken and the other universities were working on the dairy side, we got interested and we instituted a program at ST to basically do progeny testing in measuring feed efficiency or feed conversion. So we, to this date, now it's been since 2014 when we started measuring internally in our genomic herd and also in our embryo recipient herd. Today, as a result of all those measurements, we eventually were able to create genomic predictions through genetic visions. And now we genomically tested right at 260,000 females for the trait. Why is this trait important to us? Is because we are faced with two factors. One is the cost of production in the dairy, about 60 to 65% of the cost of the result of feed. And number two is because of the dairies, we are under tremendous pressure from the folks in the cities as to being part of providing a sustainable, healthy environment, reducing methane emissions. So sustainability is also a big factor in our desire to implement feed efficiency selection processes. So we're looking at not only the cost of the feed, the effect on the carbon footprint, but as how we can move as an industry over the next 10 or 15 years in being able to accomplish both goals so that we can also produce a very efficient product to feed the 9 billion people that are going to be on this earth by 2050, 2045. We have a tremendous potential to be able to improve our feed efficiency because it is a moderately heritable trait at 0.21. But first we had to measure it. So as Dr. Weigel mentioned earlier, it was important to do individual animal feed efficiency testing, feed consumption, so that we can properly calculate the feed efficiency or the feed conversion of those animals. So we built a specialized facility, two facilities, one in Ohio, one in Texas, that would allow us to do those measurements. So the facility in Texas, in Ohio, allows us to feed test about 2,000 heifers a year. And our milking facilities allow to feed test about 1,200 milking cows per year. So we're testing the animals from a very young age as growing heifers, because it does take us 24 months to take a cow to milk production. So the first day she starts generating income, we already put into that animal 2 years worth of feed. We obviously got to measure her growth, feed efficiency, as well as her feed efficiency as a milk producing animal. So we will test the females as growing females, then we'll test them again as milking cows. Today, we started, like I mentioned, we've been testing Holstein heifers and Jersey heifers, as well as Holstein cows. On the Holstein heifers, we started in 2014 with Jerseys in 2015 doing measurements. Today on the Holsteins, we got over 450,000 data points. On the Jerseys, we got about 50,000 data points. On the Holstein lactating cows, we got about 60,000 data points. We are also measuring body weight on all those animals. On the heifers, we do it during the testing period every other week. And in the milking cows, because we're measuring those cows and robot milkers, we're doing a body weight on that animal every single day. We collected quite a few individual phenotypes. And like I said earlier, we developed a system to do progeny testing first and foremost. So to this day, we've tested daughters out of 748 different Holstein bulls, 91 different Jersey bulls on the heifer side. On the Holstein cow side, we've up to about 146 different bulls. All the females were genotyped, and all the sires of those females were genotyped, and all the dimes of all those females were genotyped. And now we got a lot of bulls that got more, we got about 50 Holstein bulls that got more than $20 in the progeny test program. We got 9 Jersey bulls that got more than $20. Now we do have several bulls with more than $50 to $75. But we've been continuously making sure that we move the population as the population has moved genetically since 2015. We keep on adding more and more of the higher TPI or net merit animals to the mix. So based on the number of animals that we have, and because of the heritability of the trait that we're dealing with, about 0.21, is the number of daughters that we have to get progeny tested out of a bull to be able to increase the accuracy of the genetic prediction. So if we have 50 daughters out of a bull and a trait of medium heritability of 0.2, which is the green line, we will be able to get about 80% reliability in that kind of progeny testing program. The less daughters we got, the less reliability. The more daughters we have on some bulls, the more the reliability. So when you have 50 daughters on a bull and it's been through this type of system, we do expect with this type of trait to be reaching heritability, accuracies in the level of 80%. Now, as we move through the years from 2014 to 2020, I've got a list of the number of females that we're testing every year, and we've been systematically increasing the number of females that we run through the system on a yearly basis. We also make sure that we have kept a range in the TPI and in the net merit basis from, so if you look at, for example, 2015, the lowest females that went through the program had a TPI of 1275, with the high ones having a TPI of 2766. By the time we reached 2020, we did have a female that was down in TPI at 888. She was a recip, an embryo recip that we tested. But we did have females up in the 2864 range in TPI. So we've been very careful to keep a wide variety of genetic levels in the animals that we test, and both on the net merit basis and on a TPI basis. As a result of all this progeny testing, we've been able to now create on RFI, or residual feed intake or feed conversion, a calculation of the accuracy for each one of the bulls that we have and an accuracy for an individual animal that gets genomically tested. We chose to rank it on a formula that we call EcoFeed. And basically where the average of the population is 100. So if you are more feed efficient and you're above the average of the population, you're going to be 102, 105, 110, 115. If you're below the average of the feed efficiency of the population, then your number is going to drop below 100. That type of system easily allows us to rank the bulls and figure out whether the bull is better or worse for feed efficiency. His daughters are better or worse for feed efficiency. So in a sense, a bull that his daughters are the average of the population, he will be a 100, and a bull that is a 110 will be bulls that are significantly higher than the average of the population. So that will be a more desirable result. A more desirable result means that the daughters out of that bull will consume significantly less feed than the daughters out of a bull that are below 100. We already spoke about the heritability of feed efficiency or EcoFeed or residual feed intake, and we've calculated to be about 0.21 at this point in time. We've also looked at the correlation with the number of indexes that have been used traditionally for selecting cattle genetically, dairy cattle. And the correlations that exist, whether it's TPI or net merit or cheese merit, milk fat, protein, productive live, daughter pregnancy rate, or feed efficiency, are very, very low. So we are very happy that the selection for this trait is not going to influence selection for other traits. Now, it is a trait that has not been selected in a general basis in the population. So it's also a trait in which we got a great ability to make quick genetic improvement in it. Today, we publish the EcoFeed ranking or the feed conversion ranking for all the bulls of STgenetics. We as well publish all the EcoFeed or feed efficiency rankings for all females that have been tested through genetic visions. So like I said earlier, there's been over 250,000 females already tested through genetic visions that do have an EcoFeed score. Dr. Albert DeBreeze of University of Florida looked at all the values associated with EcoFeed and the selection of EcoFeed, and how would that relate to on a net merit basis case. So we looked in this case at a sire that is 102 for EcoFeed and assumed that the cow that he gets bred to will be a 100, which will be the average of the population. So theoretically, their daughter will be a 105 for pairing average. But because that daughter is going to be one extra point in EcoFeed, she's going to consume 0.2 pounds of feed less per day than the average of the population. If it takes us from 4 months of age to 24 months of age to 23 months of age, that's roughly about 578 days of feed to take that animal before she starts milking. That means she would consume about 115 pounds less feed than the average of the population. If you do it on a dry matter basis, that will mean about 58 pounds less feed than the average of the population. At 8 cents a dry matter cost per pound, that translates to about $4.62 on a net merit basis. That is for the savings on feed on a net merit basis for a heifer that is just 1 point on EcoFeed, better than the average of the population. But then how does that translate to a milking cow? So far to this point, the studies and the data shows that if you were to measure feed efficiency or RFI exclusively on a growing animal and compare it to a lactating animal, the correlation will be about 0.37. As we get more data in the time coming in the next year or two, that correlation may change. But today we're choosing to use what has been in the literature of 0.37 correlation. That means that the predicted feed efficiency or the RFI or the EcoFeed value for that female would, as a heifer, would correlate at a 0.37 as a lactating cow, which would mean an additional $3.79 in feed savings. So you would add the two numbers, the 462 and the 379. So in a sense, every 1 point of EcoFeed would leave on a net merit basis to a significant saving. So if we just take the net merits as it stands, the net merit formula as it stands today, and we add the EcoFeed value to it, the rankings on the bulls would change significantly. So we got here a slide with 28 bulls on the slide with different net merits and different levels of EcoFeed and at different reliabilities. And if when you add the net merit to the EcoFeed, if you look, for example, at bull number 5, the net merit, he would be ranked at 105 if it was just on a net merit basis. But once you add the EcoFeed value, he would go up to a 32nd ranking. So it could be a significant change. And why did he change that much? Because his EcoFeed value is 110. Now, on a net merit basis alone, he would be at 684 as the formula stands today. If you add the adjusted of the EcoFeed adjustment, which was 87 points, that would take him up from 684 to 771. So in order to make quick genetic improvement, obviously what you want to do is select the bulls as breeding bulls that are on the higher in the EcoFeed value or on the tail end of the bell-shaped curve. So you would try to breed bulls that are above 100 for feed efficiency or EcoFeed. We got a study that we did on a very large herd with a population of 3,600 heifers. And if you started and assumed that the population of that herd, the average EcoFeed value was 100, and they were bred to, all the females in that herd were bred to a bull, that the EcoFeed value was 104, with a reliability and accuracy of 55, that would mean their daughters would average 102. If you then bred that bull that is 102 to a bull that was 107, then their daughters will average 104.5. Well, if you take over that population, how does that translate to money in your pocket? So the savings would from 4 to 12 months of age, would be in the range of $22,000 to $56,000. From 12 months of age to calving, the range could be between $33,000 and $87,000. Overall, from 4 months of age to calving, there would be a savings somewhere between $55,000 and $143,000. Why is that range between $55,000 and $143,000? That's because of the accuracy of the prediction. The higher the accuracy of the prediction is, then the closer you're going to get to the $143,000 value. The lower the accuracy of the prediction is, the closer you're going to be to that 55,000. So in a sense, not only do you want to pick bulls that are high on the EcoFeed on the feed efficiency value, but also if you're really interested in making fast genetic progress, you want to choose bulls that have a higher accuracy level. Appreciate the time and thank you very much.
And last but not least on our panel today is Tim Clark. He is a dairy producer, 5th generation dairy farmer, farming with his wife, Carolyn, and their 5 kids and Tim's parents. Their farm is located in Brownsburg, Chatham, Quebec, where they have various enterprises, including maple production, cash crop, custom work, and dairy production. They milk about 210 Holsteins on 4 Lely A4 robots. The Clarks have a keen interest in maximizing the efficiencies of how they produce milk and adopt many new technologies and tools to help them accomplish this goal. Many feeding tools are used to maximize feed efficiency and limit cost and waste. Tim has been using EcoFeed traits in their breeding program for a while and strives to have more mid-size efficient cows that last. So with that, Tim.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you guys here today and share some of our history. I want to share some of the management choices that we've made and why we made them towards feed efficiency, and that the global objective of it is to really drive profitability. Because if you don't have profitability as the farmer, your banker's not happy, your wife's not happy, nobody gets to be happy. And you know, whether it's in Canada or whether it's in the US, we have to look at the different metrics that are going to drive our profitability. And just want to share some of the history and some of the choices that we've made and where we're at now, and our familiarity with the EcoFeed and what our vision is going forward on that. And I think the management choices that we do have and that we have made are all interrelated. And we come out of a tie stall background going back, I guess, close to 20 years now. And we moved from a tie stall herd of, 25, 30 cows going towards a parlor. And we had good enough counselors at the time to push us on genetics, to have great genetics that were ready to transition to a free stall, because the cows that work in a free stall might work in a tie stall, but tie stall cows don't generally work in free stalls. So going towards smaller animals, mid-size animals, great feed and legs, and all of that discussion that's been around for so long, and longevity traits, very important to us. So we transitioned toward the parlor and had that probably for about 15 years. And then in 2016, we transitioned towards robots. So not so much of a huge transition, still have the same freestall barn. But now we see data kind of coming in. And then 2 years later, we transitioned to Lely robots, and more reliable data were coming in, more measurements coming in, and different management systems, different management softwares. And then we can actually see the impact that brings into the cows as we can start using that data. And we start looking at what metrics in production can we actually use and can we actually gain from. And we started probably 20 years ago. We were making a kilo of butterfat per cow. And then in the parlor, towards the robot transition, you get up to 1.3, and now you get up to 1.6 a few years later. And you say, well, these are great metrics, but are we using the right metrics? Are we measuring the right things to be the most efficient? And so that's our challenge, I guess, as we go forward, or what metrics can we capitalize on to improve and to make more money? And in this case, and one of the things I'm going to talk about today is obviously improving the EcoFeed, or the dry matter efficiency of the genetics or the feed saved. And I believe that these are going to contribute to the results of the profitability of our farm. And so just one of the aspects that we have to really look at, or we focused on in the last number of years, we're really in tune on our feeding objectives. One, we've managed to, not that we managed, but we became partners with a lab and called Fermentrix, and where the objective really is to look at the feed and find out what can the bugs do, and start looking at things from a qualitative instead of always just a quantitative factor, and really look at the digestibility effects, the synergistic effects of different feeds. And then that really has an impact on, okay, how are we going to feed our cows? What are we going to grow? And then in the last year, we built a feed center where we can use our own commodities, buy in commodities in bulk. So obviously a bulk choice cuts your feed costs, which brings in more profitability. But the other thing that it's also done is given us a certain nimbleness to be flexible. If we don't like the feed, if cows don't react, then we can change things up an awful lot faster. And another management decision that we've had in the feeding side lately is going to a corn silage diet, kind of by accident. 2 years ago, all the alfalfa in the spring just wasn't looking too healthy. And we just kind of waited it out and kind of hoped and hoped and hoped. And sure enough, it was all dead. So we had already flirted with a corn silage diet for quite a while. And then it was kind of thrown upon us really quickly. So we switched to a corn silage diet, feeding mostly BMR and some conventional. So then we get to look at digestibilities and play with different digestibilities throughout the year and change our rates a lot more. And as we're doing all of this, we're using the TMR tracker program, and we'd had that for many years, and which is kind of rare for a small farm, but also difficult for a small farm because we're measuring dry matter efficiencies on there, but we also have to be quite aware as we go forward that even though absolutely everything is measured, sometimes people push the buttons at the wrong time. Sometimes, we've had it before where the numbers were off the charts, and you're looking at it and you're saying, what on earth is going on here? These numbers are crazy. Well, okay, there's 10 dry cows in with the dairy group that nobody told me about because they got loose and somebody forgot to tell us that there's 10 cows floating in there. And, if it was in a parlor, you'd pick that up pretty quick, but in a robot scenario, they just get booted out as they're not eligible. So managing that data has been difficult to always have pure information on kind of a dynamic farm that's always moving. And so from a feeding standpoint going forward, one of the biggest things that we look at for metrics is our land use and managing the manure, managing nutrient management plans, land base. And then the other thing too is just the sheer volume requirements, which require storage as well. And don't forget, if you got volume in, it has to go out somewhere. So you also have the spreading requirements. You got more volume to spread, and the costs and the windows in which to do it that are associated with that. I mean, sometimes you just have fields that just are not ready, and it's not the most ideal time to get out there and spread. So there's a lot of cost associated with those volumes. So that's really why we're looking at efficiencies for the dry matter use. And the other things too is the cost of concentrates, as well as the crazy global economy in which we live, because where soybeans and corn are going these days is kind of crazy. So if you haven't booked it, or if you're thinking about how will we do this next year or the year after, at least if we have to use less of it or can get the most out of what we're using, that's really one of our goals going forward, is how are we gonna maximize those aspects. And then coming into more of a breeding objective side of things, which really ties in, we've used mating programs from different AI companies since we've been in the tie stall. And like I said before, we've gone towards more mid-size animals. We've looked at health and longevity traits, and keeping those animals, in the barn, keeping them bred, the DPRs, the mastitis levels, and everything like that all ties in. And we can see the progression. So we do have a confidence in the genomics on that, in the genetics side, bringing us better and better cows. And our ultimate objective is always to have a cow that we never see, especially in a robot, because it's nice to know, oh, she's bred, oh, she's in calf, oh, she's going dry, and oh, that was easy, and she's not cow who's hobbling. So that's really our target, is a cow who that you never really see. From a mating program, and we've used that since tie stalls, and we've had different programs from different companies. And we've been looking for those mid-size animals. We've been looking for those animals with the health traits, the longevity traits, and ultimately targeting the animals that you never see. So that they're going to get bred back very easily, that they're going to they get to dry cows and you got to move them, and it's like, oh, you're still here. Oh, that's really cool. Your production was good. And so animals that just never give you the trouble that they're walking well and do it year after year and deliver the goods, the milk and the components. And so we've implemented complete genomic testing of all of our calves for the last number of years, which now includes the EcoFeed. And we're starting to look at that more and more. And it's really nice to see some of the numbers coming in. When you got a lot of heifers at 110 and 112, it's like, okay, we're going to track these animals and see just what they do. The challenge that we do have, having grown so much over the last number of years, kind of in different shots and increments, is that we've had a lot of purchased animals. And that kind of interferes in a certain sense with our genetic vision, and we have to manage around them, because sometimes we do need those numbers breeding back to have the number of calves, and other times, you know, we'll just breed them off to a beef, get them into an Angus, and so that's kind of been a distraction, perhaps, in our going forward with our breeding objectives. We've began to use chromosomal mating in the last little while, basing it on a net merit base. And really trying to add some component weight and especially fat to that. We're not in the fluid market, we're really in a component market in Canada. And our ratios are very critical, so we just try and get as much emphasis as we can on that. And what we're seeing is a nice uniformity in the genomic results, and that's pretty impressive on a small herd. So we're just kind of enjoying where that's going, and also enjoying the direction for the EcoFeed results that are coming back. I guess we've been using that probably for a couple of years now, since probably about the beginning of 2018, starting with bulls like Charismatic and Detour. A lot of the high ones coming out lately are Rebels. So really interested to see when they calve in, just what kind of animals that they turn into. And so it's kind of a challenge now to really read it, to learn how to use it, how to include it into our mating program and put the appropriate weighting on it. That's probably one of our challenges kind of going forward, is, you know, as within any new technology, is where is it going to fit, how are we going to do it right, and how are we going to measure it? That's a bit of our challenge. Going forward, we do really want to keep on measuring the right metrics. Looking at cow data, the robots are really bringing that interesting data to us that we can use, especially on the fat and the protein. So not only is it just kilos of milk production, then we can actually look at the kilos of components. And so we ask ourselves questions like, is the dry matter efficiency the right metric to be looking at? We know that it's an indicator of past decisions bringing us to where we are today, but it's a tough measure to always. It's tough to always get that measure right all the time and not screw it up, like I mentioned before. But it's definitely something that we have to keep working on. How do we measure it more efficiently? So it's probably one of the right metrics that we want to use. And then, you know, one of the other things we use up here, especially in Canada, is our kilos of butterfat per cow. And is that the right thing to be looking at? And I'm kind of leaning back to income over feed costs, but trying to bring that back into per kilo component, I guess you could say, or per kilo of fat. And, you know, we ask questions like, can we map out the dry matter, the kilos of dry matter over the kilos of fat produced? And, you know, what tools are we going to use? What programs? How are we going to really get down to the nuts and bolts of it? And then I want to start looking at, you know, what's the impact of individuals and outliers into, you know, on that whole dry matter efficiency equation. How do we get there? And, you know, maybe that's where the robot side of things come in. But TMRs are kind of more complicated. You know, everybody's being fed as a whole. And, you know, will we get to the point where we can cull or purchase based on these metrics on, you know, on the feed saved or the EcoFeed? Well, can we cull, can we purchase, you know, on that? And, you know, should we be culling, or, you know, and it just really relates to how are we going to get right down to the full nuts and bolts of per cow, the value per cow, and the income over feed cost per cow, as opposed to groups of cows. So perhaps a headache for another day, but it's definitely on our radar, and that's where we want to go. And are we feeding the right ration to maximize the feed efficiency traits? Is another question that I have as a dairy farmer. You know, when we look at pool rates and passage rates, and when we talk about starch levels and fermentability and protein levels, do they have an impact on any of these traits? And, you know, am I feeding to maximize those genetic traits? Those are huge questions that we have kind of going forward as we look at this. And so it's one thing to set the herd up genetically, but it's also another thing to make sure that, you know, we're maximizing the use of that trait as we go forward, and minimizing the feed cost as well. And, you know, conversely, is my ration antagonizing these traits, which I certainly would hope not. So, you know, some of the questions that we would have kind of at the barn level, I suppose you could say. And, you know, it's just a question of integration and weighing of the traits into all of these mating programs as well. So lots of exciting stuff to come, but we want to make sure that we turn it right into, just turn it right back into efficiencies and profitability for us, and, you know, keep the bank happy. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We're going to move into the question part of our panel on today's BoviNews. So I want to go back and ask, first of all, let's start out with you, Kent. How will AI companies or genomic providers offer the trait FeedSafe?
Well, I'm neither of those, but I can try to take a shot at it. I mean, I think you know, it'll be available as a standalone trait, but I really think it should be used as part of the overall index. We don't want to do single trait selection for feed saved or any other trait, but rather to use it as part of net merit. Now, it won't obviously be in there till next sire summary, but I think that's one way. I think the other way that's, you know, certainly sensible for producers who want to put more emphasis on this would be to avoid the extremes, and by that I mean the extreme inefficient animals for feed save. But I don't think they should get, you know, too carried away and try to do anything remotely close to single trait selection for it, because it's just one of the many tools we have to select for healthy and productive and profitable cows.
Well, and along those lines, how much progress could a producer expect to see, or over what period of time do you see this happening?
You know, I don't have a perfect crystal ball. I think, you know, if we look at the traits in our, you know, one way that we measure progress is by the base changes every 5 years, right? And for the traits that we really push, we tend and have good data on, we tend to change by about a standard deviation, sometimes a little more over that period of time. For those that get less emphasis, we're on the lower end. I think here, this is one that will get a lot of emphasis, but also has poor reliability. So, you know, offhand, if the standard deviation is 109 pounds, you know, for feed saved, for genetic standard deviation, I don't think we'll make that much on a every 5 year basis, but, you know, quarter to half that much. So you're talking, you know, 5-10 pounds a year per cow, which is a lot genetically, because it's cumulative. It adds up over time. And as we get more data and do some of the things that Juan is talking about also with growing heifers, I think that number goes up. And also partnering with international folks and getting more reliabilities, the number will go up even more, right? So I think you know, we'll see, but I think we're in a position to make some good progress.
Along those lines, what's the best way for a dairy producer to apply this new information to help them make breeding decisions in terms of feed efficiency?
Yeah, tagging a little bit of what Ken was saying, I think that the progress is going to be dependent and highly dependent on how much emphasis an individual farmer places on the trait, right? And on the importance of selecting for it. With the feed save is being included into the net merit basis, although you can look at the individual trait on feed save, you can look at the individual trait on EcoFeed, and then one can make a more precise decision on how much progress needs to be made. At a herdability of 0.21, the progress can be quite significant, quite fast, right? This is not going to be a slow progress. But again, it depends on the emphasis that you place and the reliability of the bulls you choose to select. And whether you're going to go look and select and keep the heifers back also that have a higher reliability and have a higher score. That's it's just down to the individual breeder's decision-making process.
And along those lines, Tim, you mentioned that you've been using EcoFeed for a couple of years. What made you start using it?
We're early adopters, for one thing, and just because we had run the TMR tracker program, just because of the relationship that we do have, partnering up with labs and just asking some of those tough questions and saying, you know, how can we get more efficient, and, you know, how can we lower the cost, and, you know, if this is something that'll bring profitability. Do I believe it's a silver bullet? Absolutely not. I don't think there's any silver bullets for us out here as farmers today. But is it a tool in the toolbox? Absolutely. And somebody has to start the ball rolling. And, you know, I think if we can make progress over the next 5 to 10 years, I'd rather be the first to get to the goalpost.
You mentioned too that you have some heifers that are coming back. You're seeing some 110s, 112s. Have you seen any benefits yet, or any that you've been able to measure on your farm?
No, these are heifers that are probably you know, 4 to 6 months old so far now. So there's no, I just don't have the facilities or the methods to record. You know, will we be able to look at feed efficiencies with the tracker when these animals calve in and there's enough of them, or look at the whole pool of the herd? You know, on the farm level, we're not scientific enough really to get there, because you're gonna move that metric up, but you're also going to go forward with your feed, your efficiencies on your feed, your digestibilities are going to get better. You know, technically they should. And so there's so many, we really have to rely on the researchers for a lot of stuff to be able to concretely measure it.
Mm-hmm. Joel, I want to go to you for a minute here. So feed efficiency obviously is difficult to measure on a dairy operation. How will producers know if they're making progress? Do you suggest monthly feed efficiency tracking? What is the best method that you recommend?
That's a good question. I think it's consistent with what all the other speakers, Kent, Juan, and Tim, talked about. If you've got a farm or producer that has this keen interest, and they adopt the whole process of feed efficiency measurement, I think that's the first step. They've got to do that first in order to know whether they're going to get a return on investment for the EcoFeed technology as an example. And I know in our business, somebody adopts a solution, we want to know if they got a return on investment also. And so I think, yes, ideally you'd want to do it at least monthly. Groups of cows are probably going to be most practical on most of our larger commercial operations. Now, that being said, as we move forward in time to Juan's 2050 target, we're going to have more technology on these dairies. You're going to see more robotics. You're going to see more large dairies in robotic parlors that can measure some of this information. We may look at dairy a little different feed efficiency wise, where we're looking at, for instance, purchased feed efficiency costs. So instead of the total diet, they're looking at milk production versus the purchased feed component that they'll be fed at the robot. So in general, I think you're gonna have you got to start by just doing the basics as I described earlier on. Once we get that nailed down, they've got it to a precise, there's all the bugs out of the system. They have an interest like Tim in doing the EcoFeed technology. It'd be pretty simple at that point. You'd be able to tag the cows that came through on the EcoFeed system. And as you get a higher proportion of animals that have that technology implemented, you should see, all else constant, within a forage year, obviously, you should see incremental bumps in feed efficiency just to do the technology. And I agree with Juan. It should be, with a heritability that high, it should be pretty rapid. So from an on-farm perspective, just measuring feed efficiency, you add this technology on top of it, you should be able to see we eliminate those human errors on farm and get the variation down, you should be able to see the result of the technology being used.
So do you see us getting down to an individual cow basis?
I will never say never, but I will say realistically, if I do a lot of field research, I could probably name on one hand a number of dairies in the Eastern and Central time zones that actually do feed efficiency good enough to do really good field research. So that being said, conventional dairies with the setups they have now, it would be very difficult. There are dairies that say they have individual cow numbers, but really what they're doing is they're taking pen numbers divided by the number of cows. They assume they all eat the same and they all milk the same just because they're in that group. That's not the case. But that being that consideration of robotics, I have 2 large dairies I work with, very large robotic dairies. They can get at those numbers. It takes time, and you have to have a person like Tim who's analytical minded, that takes the time, that understands that the data is going to make them money. So I won't ever say never. I'm 54 years old. It may not happen in my career, but it'll probably happen in the next generation.
And along the lines, you talked a lot about weighbacks because it's an important part of understanding how much cows are eating. How accurate does that need to be? Can producers start out, can we count buckets, for example, and occasionally weigh one, or what's the best on-farm method to get started on this?
Yeah, again, ideally we'd like to see them weighing each day. It's probably not going to happen. I've got farms that actually have taken buckets of refusals and they will get the average weight. That works as long as you're also taking a dry matter sample of that, because I could tell you if you're doing it weekly or monthly, the dry matter of those refusals is going to differ so much that a bucket that's 200 pounds today could be 250 next week, could be 400 the following. So if they want to do that, then they also have to take dry matters of the refusals no differently than we'd ask them to take dry matters of their feedstuffs to get a more accurate number. But, you know, again, you heard about the EcoFeed development and Juan, how detailed they were at going after these cows to get their individual body weights and what they ate and what they produced. The more rigor they put into it, the better ROI for their time they're going to get, I guess, is the best advice.
So along those lines, Juan, what role do you think that management factors such as nutrition or feeding management really, what do they have on the expression of this trait in your book?
It's the golden key, right? The genetics is only a small part of the equation, a very important part of the equation, but to express the genetics, you got to control the environment, and controlling the environment simply means putting together the best feed, the best mix, best of everything. So nutrition and nutritional sources are fundamental to the expression of the genetics, and also the individual management of the animal, the facilities, you know, and many other factors. But we see the same thing with every single genetic trait that we select for. It's not individually to feed conversion, feed efficiencies to every trait. So I was listening, and just not to divert, I was going to mention that friend of mine with the beef cow herd. When we did feed efficiency selection for him for about 12 years, 10 to 12 years. He was in a very, very unique program, and actually halfway through collecting data for him is when I became so in love with feed conversion and feed efficiency. He started with an average population of beef cattle that started measuring feed conversion and average daily gain on those animals. And he would bring in literally groups of about 500 heifers that will get tested, and about 500 bulls that will get tested. So he would test about 1,000 animals a year. Out of the 500 heifers, and this is an extreme example, he would choose the top 30 to 50 heifers as the donors for the next generation. He would only breed them to the top bulls that got measured. So, and he did this for about a period of 10 years. During that period of 10 years, I saw his feed conversion go from the original group came in about 12.5 pounds on a fed basis to a pound of gain, 12.5 pounds of feed to a pound of gain, down to about 7.8. It was amazing what I saw, and I saw it happen right in front of my own eyes over a period of 10 years. And after, you know, I saw the progression, group by group by group. I just couldn't believe it. He would pick, like I said, out of the top 500 heifers, he would just keep the top 30, 50 heifers. That's what he would make embryos out of to make the next generation of 500 heifers. And he just kept on doing it. And he was almost single trait selecting in a way. Yeah, he was measuring average daily gain and feed conversion, and he had rebuy measurements, and he had marbling, and he had all the traits. But his heaviest emphasis was on feed conversion. He just literally became infatuated, and I did eventually as well on almost single trait selecting, and the change that I saw in a very short period of time was unbelievable.
Kent, do you have anything to add? Management factors that affect the expression of the trait?
No, I think I wouldn't say I wouldn't add to that. I don't think, but I guess what I would add, and Joel got into some of this, is the genetics is one part of it, right? So breeding your way to better feed efficiency is one piece of the puzzle, but there's a whole lot else that goes into that puzzle, from harvesting, feed storage, delivery, I mean, all of those sorts of things. So don't forget that part, because that has immediate returns. Genetics has long-term returns, and they build over time. So both are great, but don't ignore the management part of it.
And Joel, how do you think nutritionists should best handle this new information and all this data?
Just to build on what Kent was saying, I kind of use the analogy, this is like an investment portfolio. You go to a financial advisor, they want you to have a combination of short-term and long-term investments. Immediately on the dairy, a high percentage of the feed efficiency calculation is going to be driven by forage quality, management of the dairy feed center, the quality of the feed, the quality of the weighbacks, the feed ingredients we talked about. That's the short-term stuff. They got to get that nailed down and really get in tune with that to really be able to see the investment long-term in this new technology. I think it's going to be just like Tim mentioned, the rapid adopters are going to be the folks that are already doing what we're talking about. They're already doing it. They're good at it. They've got it nailed down, and they're looking for the next thing. You look at environment versus genetics. Juan and I both had a genetics teacher back in the day at Ohio State, and Dr. Fetchheimer always said that it came down to, he hated saying it because he didn't like the word management, but management accounts for over 60% of it, and genetics accounts for the rest. And the bottom line is that the time it takes to reach that genetic result. Dairymen are impatient nowadays, so they've got to have these short-term gains, and you've got to build it that this is the platform, that's the foundation. You get that figured out, you'll be able to see this net result, and it'll come quick. Like Juan mentioned, with a heritability that high, it will come quick, but they have to be dedicated to doing this stuff, just the normal everyday stuff they should be doing to measure feed efficiency.
Tim, what are you using right now? Are you using your robots to measure efficiency at all?
Somewhat. We're new enough to the robots, and I guess it's always a question for the farmer to find the software platform that's going to work for you. And what we find with T4C is that we have to do a lot of exporting to the Excel. So when you have too many things to do in your day, and you just don't have that data analysis background, you just end up with too much to do. So what we're trying to do is find stuff that's going to simplify our lives. And we're working with a feed supplier who can come in and pull data off of multiple software sources, and we're asking them to do the work for us because they have the efficiency and the tools to do it. So day to day, I mean, we're looking and we're doing the data that's going to help us manage the day to day. Probably on a monthly basis, we're pulling out fat levels of different cows, fat being in Canada right now one of the most important things, more than production. And the TMR tracker is running in the background all the time, and we're always looking at our efficiencies. But it's a once a month type of thing, even on the TMR tracker. It's just, you have to make sure that all the data in is accurate, so that the data coming out of it is going to be accurate, because it'll drive you crazy otherwise. You could be either really happy for no reason or very, very discouraged for you know, it could go both ways. So, you know, you have to have good consultants around, and that's what we do. And in our case, we got a couple people on the feed side who really kind of drill down and look and grill us. Sometimes when you're too close to the situation too, you can't see it, so you need that outside help. So, you know, definitely hats off to all of the people who keep us thinking and on our toes as producers.
Agreed. It's always the power of the team. Kent, how will feed save reliability improve over time? Do you see it improving?
Yeah. As I mentioned, I think there are kind of three ways. One would be, well, then the quickest way would be international partnerships, right? We do that with a lot of other traits, and there are a number of other countries working on this as well. So I think we could increase the reference population that way. I think working, you know, we're continuing to measure more and more cows every year. So we're adding within the US here 750 cows a year, roughly. That will help. And incorporating data from the heifer period, as Juan talked about, helps. And then, you know, long term, I think there are technologies that we can use. I think some have potential, some I'm more skeptical of, for getting at indirect predictions of individual animal intakes. And they range from, you know, from 3D cameras to wearable sensors, quite a few other options as well. Some work better than others. Still, at the end of the day, it's hard to imagine that we won't have to actually, you know, do waybacks, but there's certainly potential. Thanks.
So I'd like to open it up now to everyone on the panel to give you a second to ask each other questions. And I'm going to assume maybe, Tim, you probably have some for the group as well, but does anyone have questions for each other?
Well, one of my questions, I suppose, that I have, and I alluded to it earlier, is really, how does the ration influence genetics, or does it? You know, I've looked at some of the, you know, my nutritionist and I kind of kicked it around before we got talking today, and he said, you know, like starch levels, how are they playing on stuff? So what can we do as producers to kind of maximize the use of these traits, or make sure we're not shooting ourselves in the foot? Or maybe we should just keep doing what we're doing.
You know, I can take a crack at it. I think from a genetics, well, what we see broadly across, you know, many diets, the more, the better the diet. By what definition you use, I can let Joel or somebody else clarify what that exactly means. The more the genetic potential is expressed, right? And so if you look at a situation where the environment is limiting or the ration is limiting, you won't necessarily have the animals ranked differently, but they may a little bit. But mostly what you'll see is the differences between animals are compressed. And as you improve and ratchet up your management and your nutrition, then those genetically superior animals go further and further above the rest, right? So you get your, you don't necessarily change the ranking, but you definitely change the return on investment quite dramatically.
Anyone have anything to add?
No, I think Kent's exactly right. It's I kind of look at it this way: the animal's been given a genetic deck of cards to deal with when it hits the ground, and it's our job to not manage away the advantage that we've given her through breeding. So whether that's forage quality, housing, overcrowding, heat abatement, all that stuff can either enhance a genetic potential for an animal or depress the genetic potential for the animal. So to your point, Tim, yeah, my personal opinion, I think as time goes on, you're gonna have more technologies, more genetic advantages to take advantage of, but at the end of the day, we still have to do the basic stuff at the dairy, and that's why I made the comment earlier that the people that are gonna jump on this technology right out of the gate, in my mind, are gonna be the people that are already doing, you know, forage management. They're measuring their refusals. They may not have it accurately done, but they're at least precise for their farm. They're doing things using TMR tracker. Unfortunately, data, you hit on it, Tim, data aggregation is one of the biggest challenges that we see on these dairies. You've got so much data being collected from multiple sources, and sometimes you need data from 3 or 4 different sources to come up with a calculation. That to me is going to be the next sweet spot. If we can come up with the, I don't know what the term would be, but something that would aggregate all this data, and so we wouldn't have to put it into the super Excel spreadsheet like you and I and everybody else has been doing. That would be great. It would be great, and it would help this whole conversation take off really quick.
I think it's really interesting. There's known data out there, at least on the beef side, that higher grain diets lead to a better feed conversion on a per pound of feed as fed basis, right? So in the case of finishing steers, for example, those diets are pretty heavy on corn, and they convert a lot better than when it's a higher roughage diet. So obviously with dairy cattle, we got to be careful as to how high of a grain diet that we place on those animals, on how hard we push them, or we start getting into a bunch of other problems of acidosis, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a fine balance that we all have to deal with as to how these animals got to be fed and how hard can you push them in order to be able to express those genetics.
Great point, Juan. Any other questions for each other? Okay. Well, my sincere thanks to Joel, Kent, Juan, and Tim for taking the time today. And thank you to all of you for taking your time listening to this webinar. It's quite clear that improving feed efficiency is really important to enhancing the profitability on farms today. And we all know that there's management practices to enhance feed efficiency, but improvements in genetics play a pretty significant role as well. So thanks again for your time and tuning in to another edition of BoviNews.